Okay. Hi there. We're back, and today we're going to talk about coercive control. Coercive control. So just to jump in real quick, as always, I have my notes, and I think in most of my videos, I started to explain that I myself am a survivor of domestic violence and intimate partner violence. We'll see if I can speak English today, huh? And some of the things I like to cover are the explanations behind maybe why abuse takes place. The reason that I like to cover those things is just because in my own healing path, it really helped me to understand why people could do such awful things. And it sort of made those things that were terrible a little bit more easy to digest. So if that's not your method of healing, that's fine. But what my channel is not here to do is we're not here to sit and stew. We have to keep moving on with our lives. And so part of that is understanding. One of the things I wanted to cover is what's called coercive control. So, coercive control refers to a pattern of controlling behaviors that creates an unequal power dynamic within a specific relationship. Usually it's intimate. Sometimes it can be, father daughter, father son, mother daughter, mother son. And it's basically giving the abuser the power and control over their partner and making it difficult to leave the situation. So some examples would be maybe a narcissistic dad who provides all of the money for the family, paying for kids' college, doesn't want kid to have a boyfriend, starts removing college funds because kid finds a boyfriend, stuff like that. Coercive control is usually more dominant in emotionally and financially abusive relationships as opposed to physically abusive relationships. Coercive control does not include gaslighting, which is why it's a very difficult thing to prove in a courtroom. For situations with coercive control in a courtroom, and especially on my channel, we're pro se. We do things without attorneys because that's what we do. We solve our problems. And to prove things like coercive control, you're going to have like emails, documents, something showing maybe like a credit card was canceled or bills weren't getting paid and they were primarily responsible for paying the bills, historically speaking. You're going to have something like that to bring to court to show that while maybe we're not getting physically assaulted, we are certainly being emotionally damaged, and that's called coercive control. It's anything that makes you feel like you cannot leave. That's what coercive control. If you think coercion, right, which is illegal in the workforce. There's a boss maybe that says, "Oh, I'll give you that promotion, but you have to come hang out after hours at such and such bar." That's coercion. Now we're afraid to leave and now we don't want to get the promotion. So you just kind of, out of fright, you sit in one spot and you sort of try to buckle up for the rough roller coaster ride that may be about to happen. That's what coercion is. I've coerced you into staying in a situation somehow involving the two of us, something like that. Some examples of coercive control, because this method is usually consisting of things like, so usually coercive control consists of something like maybe they're tracking your location. And I've heard of situations with other survivors saying, well, my Snapchat location was turned on and they wouldn't let me turn it off, or then they would scream at me about cheating. That is coercive control. That's abuse. Controlling of social media, back-to-back text messages or phone calls where you've laid a boundary down. Maybe you're co-parenting with a narcissist or an abuser, and they send you 4 or 5 text messages in a row, sometimes up into the teens. So I've heard stories about more. I think when I was in my situation and I was leaving the situation, I got 20 something text messages back to back to back to back, including emails, phone calls, voicemails. That's coercion. They're trying to coerce you and make you uncomfortable, and deter you from leaving the unhealthy situation. So things like monitoring the phone bill, there's sexual coercion, close monitoring of victims' behaviors, sleep deprivation techniques is a big one. If you start dating somebody and you are getting, all of a sudden you're getting woken up at 4 in the morning, 5 in the morning, told that such and such chores weren't done yesterday. They need some help with them at crazy, inappropriate hours, fighting up into, late at night hours. Sleep deprivation is something that it's a tactic that's been used in the military. It's a tactic that's been used in science. There's been several experiments on human behavior and responses to sleep deprivation. It is a skill, for lack of a better word, that abusers use to groom their prey into becoming more susceptible and more, seem more willing to tolerate the abuse and sacrifice our boundaries because we're tired, right? So let's say we agreed no arguing at 7 p.m., but at 6:45 p.m., somebody started an argument. And now you're up until the all hours and you're exhausted and you're just going to deal with it. And you're probably going to let them win the argument and, apologize for something. And eventually over time, all of those apologies that maybe you didn't mean, maybe we have the cognitive awareness to say, I don't mean this apology, but I need to go to sleep. So I'm going to say sorry if it makes it stop. Eventually that's going to distort your sense of what's called autonomy, our sense of self. So eventually that will eat away at you, that sleep deprivation. But that's a common technique. I think there's been a couple situations, mine included, where that was a technique that was used in order to break down my, my resistance or my ability to uphold my boundaries. Refusing to let the victims work and or getting the victim fired. That's another very obvious form of coercion. Getting somebody fired or refusing to let them work, that one's going to be a difficult one to prove in a courtroom. You can't, if it's a, face-to-face argument where they want you to come home for whatever reason, and, you're trying to prove that in a courtroom, that's going to be hard to hold up. What isn't hard to hold up, though, is if you sit back and you wait on it. Because what abusers do is they will always tell you their next move. They will. They may not do it in a way that we like or a way that we understand at first, but if you start doing what you're doing, which obviously you're on the right path, you're trying to gain some understanding about the situation. If you start understanding, they all have a mood cycle, and this is probably a good idea for my next video, but they all have a mood cycle. So eventually you can start predicting all of their next moves. Because you're starting to pay attention. You're out of the clouds, the fuzziness, the fog, it's all behind you. But now you're saying, okay, so this week of April, he was mean for 6 days and I got nasty messages all week long. So now the following week of April, odds are high that they're going to be in a better mood and you're probably going to be able to work with them a little bit more. So refusing to let the victim work or getting the victim fired is a form of that's a legally recognized form of coercion to try and control the victim, you in the situation. And one thing that I learned from my own experiences is it's best, instead of throwing, accusations, you got me fired, you wouldn't let me show up, you this, you that. It's so much easier to sit on the back burner and just, man, I don't know what happened with that. Wow, I don't know how I got terminated. And eventually the abuser wants the credit for what they've done in a sick way. I don't know why they are like that. We will find out together on this channel, but they will rub it in 100%. It's just a matter of the waiting game. So once you get that text message and stuff, then you have things that, for example, if you're in a child custody fight, and you're having difficulty proving how nasty they are, well, if they've sent you a message about admitting about getting you fired, and especially if you were the sole income, which isn't frequently the situation. In my situation, it was. With narcissistic situations, typically the narcissist will have income because that's the way they operate. In abusive situations, it's a little different because they're very sick. They can't hold long-term employment. So I was the primary income for my situation, and once I ended up getting terminated because of some things, I waited on that. And I wanted those text messages. I wanted something because my son was a bigger priority, right? My daughter is a bigger priority. So I sat back and I waited, and now we have what's called a text message showing that they put in a complaint, enough complaints to eventually get somebody terminated from their position. And that's going to go a long way in court. So that's going to that's going to take you a long ways in court, especially if you're proving who's the better household. And meanwhile, somebody is out there trying to get you terminated. That's not the best household for them to be in. It's just a matter of getting that proof. So I digress again. This is why I try to bring my notes every time. So how does coercive control affect us? Coercive control is dangerous because it affects our self-esteem and our sense of self. The form of abuse is common in the extreme negative end of the behavioral cycle. So you'll see something like love bombing, hoovering, it's also known as, which that's the positive reinforcement. That's the click, click, here's your treat. You did a good job. You stuck with me through the worst. Here's your treat. And you'll see things like violence or coercive control in the more negative end of the spectrum for that negative reinforcement. And that's going to be the two positive and the negative ends of the cycle. They both create what's called a trauma bond. And if you've been researching for any time at all, you know about trauma bonds. It's what keeps us victims there. Intimacy and sex are frequently used to manipulate the power dynamic as well. Things like violating sexual boundaries and choosing to ignore sexual preferences are ways that an abuser can start chipping away at our self-esteem and make us more susceptible to tolerate the abuse. Same with sleep deprivation. Manipulating our sexual boundaries is often approached with the quote, "I'm just spicing things up" spiel. But in reality, they are disrespecting our bodies. And, when intimacy takes place, it's a very vulnerable place to be. So we're kind of taking our sense of self and expressing it in a very personal way. So to deal with somebody who can violate those boundaries, that's very, very difficult. Saying nasty things and negative things to create an eating disorder, that also is a common method of coercion. I have met several survivors of domestic violence that do suffer from things like bulimia, anorexia, and they end up getting admitted to a hospital. It's an addiction, and it's a mental health disorder, and it's a serious thing. And over time, with somebody, my cat's scratching again. Over time, with somebody saying, here's your calorie count for the day, that's gonna dwindle our self-esteem. We're gonna be, once again, back to the sleep deprivation thing. I can't harp on it enough. It's gonna make us tired. We're gonna be drained. We're gonna be tolerating the abuse more frequently because we're so exhausted. And so that's kind of robbing us of our self-esteem and our sense of self. That really is the epitome of how coercion can affect us survivors and current thrivers is how I like to put that. The red flags with coercive control. Red flags would be all of it, essentially, but sometimes when we're in a relationship with them, we don't pick up on the red flags because we love them. We love them in a normal way. So we want what's best. We're not understanding that they're putting us in danger because we wouldn't do that to them. We don't see that. So when you see, people actively in domestic violence situations, we don't understand that it's dangerous, because why would somebody do that to us when we just love them? We just love them to kingdom come, and we want everything that's phenomenal for them. Meanwhile, they're going through coercive control, for example, where they're just slamming us. So assaults are a red flag, threats, insults or humiliation, isolation, activity monitoring, financial control, and sexual coercion are just a few of them that I managed to write down from my own experiences. This can vary widely. Red flags for coercive control. I have heard that it starts out simple. It just starts out with like, hey, your friend said such and such to me. I don't really like hanging around them. I'm not going to hang around them. And I love you, so we're going to be hanging out a lot. Do you think that maybe we should not hang out with them as much? Stuff like that. That's how it's going to start. And that should be your red flag right away. In order to understand that we are being abused, we have to start digging into the abuse methods and what classifies as abuse. That's why I started this channel. All too often I see victims saying things like, well, he never hit me, or he kicked me out because I didn't respect his request, or, just remember, just the biggest thing is that we need to remember, if we're uncomfortable, it's a sign. Like I mentioned earlier, if people love us, they are not going to make us uncomfortable. They're not going to put us in situations where we can't trust them. And I can't stress that enough. If your partner is a healthy partner, number one, you wouldn't be researching these things right now. If your parent was a healthy parent, you would not be researching these things right now. If your co-parent was healthy and has healed, you would not be researching these things right now. That should be your first red flag. If somebody loves you, says they love you, they would not ever make you uncomfortable in situations. If this is your first healthy relationship following an abusive situation, that's kind of an exception because you're relearning how to be in a relationship, period. So the whole learning process of finding this awesome, adorable, old school romantic love is a little bit uncomfortable because we've just been told for several years that we don't deserve it. And here we are, we have found a partner and we truly, truly appreciate them. And sometimes we don't know how to accept that appreciation back. And that's okay. That uncomfortable, that's normal in the healing process. It shouldn't be permanent. We should keep growing, but it's normal for a little while. Deep down, abusers they're victims of their own parental relationships and childhood trauma. And they're people who refuse to heal. So in order for me to co-parent, I really had to find the forgiveness in myself and let it go and move on. And the reason that I had to do that is because if every time I dealt with my, I'm not going to say co-parent, but my counter-parent in this situation. And if you haven't researched co versus counter-parents, please go do so. Counter-parenting is typically how abusers approach the subject of parenting. You don't really get lucky enough to have a co-parent. It's going to be either parallel parenting or counter-parenting for the next 18 years. But we love our kids, so it's all worth it. So finding the empathy to understand that this person was very, very sick really gave me a lot of, I think, adult skills that I needed, and those translated. So once I did the therapy, once I did the work on myself, those skills translated into my business life, my professional life. And I was able to see something, for example, a coworker having a rough day snapping at me. That wasn't anything to do with me, and neither is the abuse. And I know that that's a hard concept. That took me, quite a few years to figure out and to be able to let go and to be able to laugh and smile with my kids and not panic every time the door is unlocked or, panic every time I see the same make and model of the car. I was able to find the things that gave me joy again. And I really, really strongly recommend finding the empathetic approach. Not only that, but for court cases, if you approach it with a judge from a perspective of he's sick and he needs help. He doesn't need punishment. He needs help. I'm not going to be the one to give it to him. I'm not his therapist. That's not my responsibility. My responsibility are my kids and my job and my family, and that's it. But once I was able to, come with that approach to court, it really, I think, escalated the way I was heard, because it was just another adult talking to a different adult about somebody who just had problems in their childhood and in their adulthood. And there comes a time where they refuse to accept it, and that's okay. We're all entitled to refusal of care. But on the flip end of that, we can't hold somebody else accountable for our own choices and our own decisions. It was their choice to be abusive, and it's my choice to heal. That's how I see that. So I may not like what happened, and I may not deal with them, and that's okay. That's my choice. But the thing is, if I approach it from an empathetic perspective, it really does help me And it really helped my parenting relationship with my kids as well, because I mean, that just rang true in so many different aspects of my life. I was able to be empathetic with my kids when they were going through a hard time, and I was able to take my abuser's situation and understand, okay, if I don't fix myself, the trauma cycle is going to repeat. And I don't want to see my kids live the life that I have lived. I don't want to see my daughter go through the things I've gone through, my son go through the things I've gone through. If I had it my way, they would live in a field full of daisies and rainbows for their whole life. But finding the empathy definitely helped me find happiness and grow. And it also helped me protect my kids. I mean, when you find happiness, you find being present, being in the moment. And it's the same in a courtroom. You have to be very present. You can't be emotionally volatile or, on a roller coaster or reacting. You have to be very steadfast in your purpose. And it's hard. It's hard. Nobody tells you how hard it is to leave a domestic violence situation until you're leaving it. And then it's just like, man, what did I do? But we get through it. You're here, you're doing research, you're opening up your mind to new concepts. A lot of the concepts I read feel crazy. It feels crazy for me to be talking about it because I remember I was so mad. I was so angry all the time for a long time, and just I didn't want to find forgiveness. I wanted them to go through the justice system and be held accountable for everything that they ruined. But once I started finding the empathy and the happiness, my life got so much better. I got the job of my dreams. I am living in the city that I've always dreamed about living in. I have an amazing relationship with a very healthy partner, and it's just been phenomenal. Just been phenomenal. And there's no way to experience all of those good things while you're still angry. It's just not possible. So when we're stuck on anger and thinking things that are habitual, that are on repeat, like, how could he hurt my kids? Or why would he get me fired? Or why would he encourage certain acts in the bedroom and then use it against me in an argument? Those are all examples of coercive control, the threats to hurt your kids, the getting fired, the threats and holding, sexual behaviors over your head in a healthy relationship is not okay. That really is coercive control. So it really makes it difficult to live out our own lives and find joy and happiness. And it staying angry really keeps us stuck in the cycle of abuse, even when the relationship has been over for a significant amount of time. So that's all I got for today. I went ahead and I dropped the phone number for the domestic violence hotline below. That was a good coping skill that I used to help myself get through situations if it was a weekend and I was having a panic attack. It would really help me when I couldn't get in touch with my therapist or our family therapist to talk about things. And it was just another source to vent. If you are still in a domestic violence situation, please, please, please do not, do your research. Do your research. There are some phone lines that don't pop up as the domestic violence hotline on your phone bill. So if you're still in a coercive control situation, you need to be cognizant of that phone bill. If that's something that's getting looked at, you need to be cognizant of your phone records. If they have access to your phone, if they can unlock your phone, those call records can all be seen, obviously. So if you do call, please just put your safety first and foremost. Make sure that you maybe call from a friend's phone, call from anywhere else. There are some websites on there, not on Google, so please don't Google it on your phone if you're going to get noticed. And perhaps the abuser, once again, with that coercive control, will use that against you. So just be smart when you're finding your resources. Be clever, be cunning. You're very smart to be surviving the things that you have survived. And I know that about you. So just keep doing you, make good choices, and absolutely prepare yourself. You're not alone. And give that number a call if you can, okay? All right. Bye.